So, once again, a very good afternoon to all of you. I hope all of you are well, keeping healthy, well, looking after yourself, looking after your family members. Now is not the time to be angry. Now is not the time to fight with anyone. Now is the time to be connected, to stay connected, to help each other.
Yes, ma'am.
We do not know what is going to happen tomorrow, right? So, continuing the story, the selfish giant, uh, which we had taken up in the last class. So let us complete the story today. Study the screen. Some people are still coming in the class. All right. Here's the screen. So the selfish giant. We saw in the selfish giant in the last class how a selfish giant lived in a tower alone. He did not like to meet people. He did not like anyone. He was alone, and there was only one friend. So when the selfish giant was bored, he went to meet his friend, and he stayed at his friend's house for 7 long years. So what happened at his house at the tower which he lived in? The selfish giant lived alone, but then he had a very beautiful garden which had all kinds of flowers, fruit, trees. It was a lovely garden. So when the giant was away for 7 years, the villagers thought that he will not come back now. They waited for him, and as years passed by, 1 year after the other, so by the end of the 7th year, the villagers thought that now the giant will not be coming back. So the children, they started playing in the garden, and they were very happy then. The children played, the birds sang, and life was so beautiful. So there was happiness all over. The birds sang so sweetly that the children stopped to play and listen to the birds singing. So everything was going on. Everything was going on perfectly well. And there, the giant. Now, after 7 years, he got bored. He had nothing to say. He had nothing to talk. So he thought of coming back home. And one day he decided. He told his friend that he would like to go back home. But what happened? When he reached home, he was shocked. What did he see? He saw that the children were playing in his garden. And then he became so angry that he chased all the children away. The children were so afraid to see him. The children were frightened. The children were shocked to see him. Oh no, the selfish giant has come back. So they rushed out. They ran out one after the other. They fell, they ran, they got up, again they ran. And within seconds, they were out of the selfish giant's garden. They were afraid. They were fearful. And the giant was so angry. He shouted, he screamed, he scolded. How dare you play in my garden? This is my garden, he shouted. He roared like an animal. And this is my garden. Only I'm going to play here. And so he was so angry that he built a huge wall around the garden and wrote a sign: trespassers will be punished, prosecuted. This is private property. Stay out, keep out. So the next day, the children came. They saw the huge wall. They saw the sign. And they were so sad. They told each other how happy we were there. And now we have nowhere to play. They were sad. The season changed from winter to spring. The spring gave flowers to the spring gave flowers to all the gardens. Everywhere it was springtime. There were beautiful flowers. There were birds singing. But in the selfie giant's garden, there were no flowers. There were no birds. And even the flowers, when they saw the signboard, they went back to sleep. So there were no flowers. There were no birds. It was still winter in the selfie giant's garden. So the season changed from spring to autumn. The trees were laden with fruits. It gave fruits to all the gardens. But in the selfie giant's garden, she said, "No, I will not give any fruit. He is too selfish." And the winter, it was the longest winter ever. The winter continued and continued and continued. The whole garden was covered with snow. There was nothing but sadness, winter, chilly wind, frost, hail. And the giant thought, why the winter has stayed so long? It worried him. So we were up to here, isn't it? So one morning, what did he see? Long winters, icy chilled, cold wind, sadness, no sun, no birds, no flowers. So what happened? One morning, the giant was lying awake in his bed. when he heard some lovely music. It was so long since he had heard a bird sing. It was so long since he had heard a bird sing in his garden that it seemed to him to be the most beautiful music in the world. So, एक दिन क्या हुआ? He was lying awake in his bed. वो अपने रूम में था, लेटा हुआ था. तभी उसको म्यूजिक सुनाई दिया. बहुत दिनों से कोई म्यूजिक उन्होंने सुना नहीं था. It was so long, कई दिनों से. He had not heard a bird singing. And जब वो म्यूजिक सुनता है, जब वो गाना सुनता है चिड़िया का, तो समझता है कि दिस इज द मोस्ट ब्यूटीफुल म्यूजिक इन द वर्ल्ड. इतना अच्छा म्यूजिक तो हो ही नहीं सकता, बिकॉज बहुत दिनों के बाद वो चिड़िया का गाना सुन रहा था. Then he noticed that the north wind and hail were quiet and the air was filled with the sweet perfume. और फिर वो नोटिस किया कि विंटर अब नजर नहीं आ रहा है, न वो ठंडक है विंड में, हर जगह क्वाइट है, शांति है, और एक पूरा माहौल एंड द एयर वाज फिल्ड विद स्वीट परफ्यूम. और फूल खिलने का जो परफ्यूम होता है, द परफ्यूम ऑफ फ्लावर्स, फूलों की खुशबू से पूरा माहौल वातावरण भरा हुआ था. I'm reading this again. Then he noticed that the north wind and the hail were quiet and the air was filled with a sweet perfume. Then he saw the most wonderful sight. फिर वो क्या देखता है? Through a little hole in the wall, the children had crept in and they were sitting in the branches of the trees. तो वो क्या देखता है? जो उसने वॉल खड़ी की थी गार्डन में, उसमें एक होल हो गया था और जिससे बच्चे रेंग करके गार्डन में आ रहे थे. क्रेप्ट का मतलब होता है क्रॉल, क्रेप्ट. छोटे बच्चे क्रॉल करते हैं, इसका पास्ट टेंस क्रेप्ट होता है. सो उन्होंने देखा कि उस होल से, दीवार के होल से बच्चे अंदर आ रहे, अंदर आ चुके हैं. एंड दे वर सिटिंग इन द ब्रांचेस ऑफ द ट्रीज. और बच्चे आकर के पेड़ों के ब्रांचेस पे बैठे हुए. And the trees were so glad to have the children back. And the children were so glad to have the children back again. And they had covered themselves with blossoms and the birds twittered happily. The children were sitting on the branches of the tree. बच्चे पेड़ पर बैठे हुए थे. पेड़ बहुत खुश हो गए और वो अपने को कवर कर लिए फूलों से, ब्लॉसम्स, फूल. तो बर्फ कहाँ गया पता नहीं, उसकी जगह पत्ते और फूल आ गए और बर्ड्स वापस आ गए. एंड बर्ड्स ट्विटर्ड हैप्पीली. और बर्ड्स चहचहाने लगे, ट्विटर्ड. Children came. There were flowers on the trees, there were blossom on the trees, and the birds started singing. And then what happened? So every day, everywhere, हर जगह वहां पर विंटर का नामो निशान नहीं था। हर जगह फूल, बच्चे, बर्ड्स, सब कुछ वापस आ गए थे। लेकिन ओनली इन वन कॉर्नर इट वॉज स्टिल विंटर। गार्डन का एक कोना, जहां पर अभी भी विंटर था, हर जगह स्प्रिंग का आगमन हो चुका था। ओनली इन वन कॉर्नर देयर वाज स्टिल विंटर। व्हाई? Because the small child could not reach the branches of the tree. छोटा बच्चा पेड़ पर चढ़ नहीं सका, स्पर्श नहीं हो पा रहा था, नहीं हुआ, इसलिए अभी तक वहां एक कोने में विंटर ही था। Only in one corner it was still winter. In it was a little boy. वहां एक बच्चा खड़ा था, एक बच्चा खड़ा, जो इतना छोटा था कि वो पहुंच नहीं पा रहा था। He could not reach the branches. He was so tiny. और छोटा था। He was so small that he could not reach up to the branches of the tree. And he was wandering all around it, crying bitterly. और वो पेड़ के चारों इर्द गिर्द घूम रहा था, रोते हुए। Crying bitterly means crying. बुरी तरह रो रहा था। A crying child. The child was crying. So what happened? The giant's heart melted. वो giant देख रहा था ये, उसका दिल पसीज गया, मेल्ट कर। The giant's heart melted as he looked out. तो ये सब वो देख रहा था अपने रूम से, अभी नीचे वो आया नहीं था, और वहां से वो देख रहा था। और फिर वो सोचता है, हाउ सेल्फिश आई हैव बीन, कि मैं भी कितना सेल्फिश था। वो अपने आप से बात कर रहा है। हाउ सेल्फिश आई हैव बीन, he said. Now I know why the spring would not come here. And now I know why the spring did not come here. He was sad, but now he was thinking. What was he thinking? What did he do? उसके बाद वो क्या करता है? Yes? क्या करता है? His heart melted. उसका दिल पसीज गया. He crept downwards. वो नीचे आता है. He opened the front door quite softly. धीरे से वो दरवाजा खोलता है and went out into the garden. वो धीरे से नीचे उतरता है and he goes into the garden. But what happens? So let me get back. So this is a one important point of time when I'm stopping, because it's a major question. How did the giant became kind? किस तरह से इसको आभास हुआ? अपनी गलती का आभास कब हुआ? इसी जगह पे आभास होता है। How did the
उसका गार्डन में
हाँ बताइए, how, at what time the giant became kind? When he realized that how selfish I was.
when the children come in the garden, that time was around in winter in the garden.
When he
Then
realized that how selfish I was, and because of my selfishness, because the children were not there in my garden, that is why the spring did not come. Birds did not sing. And the autumn did not give any fruit. Why? Only because of one reason. Because the children were not allowed to come in the garden. But as soon as he sees, जैसे ही वो देखता है कि birds भी आ गए और बच्चे भी आ गए, तो बच्चों के आते ही flowers हो गए. There were blossoms, there were flowers, there were birds singing. So at this point of time, he realizes अपनी गलती को समझता है कि ये सब सिर्फ इसलिए हुआ था कि वो बच्चों को उन्होंने वहां से हटा दिया. These questions are there which are important. जहाँ जहाँ हम स्टॉप करके आपको समझा रहे हैं. So, who was this child? So here we were, the crying child. So this child was crying, and when he saw the child crying, the giant came down. He came down quietly. The giant's heart melted. उसका दिल पसीज गया. As he looked out, how selfish I have been, he said. Now I know why the spring would not come here. And then he decided, I will put that poor little boy on the top of the tree, and then I will knock down the wall, and my garden shall be the children's garden. I will knock down the wall, and my garden shall be the children's playground forever and ever. ये जो लाइन है, ये हमेशा आपके एग्जाम में आता है. और आपको लिखना होता है ये लाइनें किस स्टोरी से ली गई है और किसने कहा ये. Who said and from which story? So you will have to write. These lines have been taken from the story The Selfish Giant. And these lines were spoken by the selfish giant. When he realized his mistake, then he said that my garden will be your garden. My garden will be, I will knock down the wall, and my garden shall be the children's playground forever and ever. हमेशा हमेशा के लिए बच्चों का गार्डन हो जाएगा. तो दो चीजें उसने करी. वो क्या क्या चीजें थी? एक तो वो सोचा बच्चे को पेड़ पे चढ़ा दूंगा मैं, और दूसरी बात जो वो सोचा था कि दीवार जो खड़ी उन्होंने कर दी थी उसको गिरा देंगे.
अब वो प्राइवेट नहीं रहेगा, अब वो
और
सबको
फिर
देगा.
वो ये बच्चों को बोलेंगे अब मेरा गार्डन नहीं है, तुम्हारा गार्डन. जब तक चाहो तो So this is the first time that you see the giant is happy. वो उस बच्चे को पेड़ पे चढ़ा देते हैं. The child is very happy. The child thanks him by kissing him. For the first time in his life, the giant felt love. The first time he felt kindness. अभी तक इसे समझ में उसको नहीं आया था कि ये सभी चीजें होती है, काइंडनेस भी कोई चीज होती है. His heart melted. He crept down. वो नीचे धीरे से आया. And opened the front door quite softly and went out into the garden. But बच्चे जैसे ही इसको देखते हैं सब भाग जाते हैं. But when the children saw him, they were so frightened that they all ran away and the garden became bitter again. तो यहाँ पर क्या होता है? जब वो नीचे आता है, the selfish giant, and when the children see him, they become so frightened, डर जाते हैं वो लोग. और भाग जाते हैं बाहर, और उनके भागने से क्या होता है, गार्डन में
विंटर
फिर
आ जाता है,
गार्डन में फिर से क्या आ जाता है,
विंटर आ जाता है,
फिर आ जाता
विंटर आ जाता है।
है। So he crept downstairs and opened the front door quite softly and went out into the garden. But when the children saw him, they were so frightened that they all ran away, and the garden became winter again. So when the small boy was helped, this is the giant and he is helping the small boy. और जैसे ही वो बच्चा ऊपर चढ़ता है, पूरे पेड़ में, पूरे पेड़ पर आप देखें फूल खिल जाते हैं। तो बच्चों के स्पर्श से जो करिश्मा हो रहा था वो आप देख, तो पहली बार जायंट डिस्कवर्स लव, उसको पता चलता है कि लव नाम की कोई भी चीज होती है। पहली बार उसको एहसास होता है, देयर इज सम फीलिंग कॉल्ड लव। तो दीज आर द मेजर पोर्शंस जहां पर एग्जाम में आते हैं। एंड द जायंट स्टोर लव बिहाइंड हिम एंड टुक हिम जेंटली इन हिज हैंड एंड पुट हिम अप इनटू द ट्री। और वो धीरे से आके उस बच्चे को पेड़ पर बैठा देता है। एंड द ट्री ब्रोक एट वंस इनटू ब्लॉसम, और बच्चे के स्पर्श से वहां फूल खिलने लगे। एंड द बर्ड्स केम एंड sang on it, and the little boy stretched out his two arms and flung them around the giant's neck and kissed him. और वो छोटा बच्चा इसको थैंक्स कहता है और उसको किस करता है। Now you see the giant is smiling, the giant is happy. And when the people were going to market at 12 o'clock, they found the giant playing with the children in the most beautiful garden they had ever seen, and the giant was never selfish again. और अगले दिन लोगों ने देखा कि जायंट बच्चों के साथ खेल रहा है, बिकॉज उन्होंने दीवार गिरा दी थी और उन्होंने कहा था कि अभी ये गार्डन मेरा नहीं है, नाउ दिस गार्डन इज योर गार्डन, सो यू कैन प्ले हियर। So the next day when the villagers saw that the children were playing in the garden, they were surprised that that the giant is playing with the children, and they were all happy. The giant was happy, the children were happy, so everything was good. As you see in the picture, and the children came running back, and with them came the spring. So when the giant broke the wall down, the children came back running, and when they came back, the spring came. The giant said, "It is your garden now. It is your garden now, little children. ये तुम लोग का garden," said the giant, and he took a great axe and knocked it all down. उसके बाद people saw that every afternoon the giant played with the children. Now the giant is happy. Now the giant is happy. The question here comes, from a selfish giant, what made him into a kind giant? How did the giant became kind? What were the cause of the giant's happiness?
The cause of happiness is come back to play in the garden again of the children.
Yes, these things are to be answered. So and he knocked down the wall, and now the giant is happy. So time went on, time went by, and now the giant was old. It was many years after this incident, after years and years and years, now the giant was old. But he waited for that little child. उस छोटे से बच्चे के लिए वो इंतजार करता था कि जिसको वो पेड़ पे बिठाया था, कहाँ गया वो लड़का, कहाँ गया वो बच्चा। वो सबसे पूछता था, वेयर इज दैट चाइल्ड, वो क्यों नहीं आता, उसको देखा नहीं। और बाकी बच्चों ने कहा, हम लोगों ने भी कभी देखा नहीं था, पहले भी कभी नहीं देखा था। years pass by, साल गुजरते गए और जायंट उसका वेट करता था। एक दिन वो देखा, वही छोटा बच्चा उसी पेड़ के नीचे खड़ा है। Then one day he saw that the small child was standing below that tree. He came down. और वो क्या देखता है, वो छोटे से बच्चे के दोनों हाथ पे कील ठुके होने का निशान था। The giant sees the wounds on the child's hands and legs. आपको पता है जीसस क्राइस्ट को सूली पे चढ़ाया गया था, तो उनके दोनों हाथ और पैर में कील ठुका गया था। और जायंट ये देखा, तो छोटे से बच्चे के हाथ में, दोनों हैंड्स और लेग्स में वो जख्म का निशान था। The giant becomes very angry. किसने किया? Who did this to you? Sorry. और जायंट पूछता है उससे, Who has dared to wound thee? किसकी हिम्मत हुई जो तुम्हारे साथ तुमको जख्म पहुंचाया, तुमको wounded किया है? For on the palms of the child's hands were the prints of 2 nails, and the prints of 2 nails were on the little feet. नाराज हो जाता है जायंट, पूछता है ये किसने किया तुम्हारे साथ? But that child, he said, no. Nay means no. The child answered, but these are the wounds of love. और वो कहते हैं ये wounds हैं, ये जख्म है, ये जख्म प्यार के जख्म। And Christ says these are the wounds of love. As you see the picture of Jesus Christ, he is carrying his cross. Christ blesses the giant to live in heaven. And when he sees that, and when he realizes, जब उसको समझ में आता है कि छोटा बच्चा और कोई नहीं, the small child was Jesus Christ, जो जायंट को सबक सिखाने के लिए आए थे नीचे। और the giant was a changed person now. And that small child, उन्होंने कहा कि जिस तरह से तुम बच्चों को खेलने दिए यहाँ पे, उसी तरह से you will come and play in my garden. मतलब अब तुम मेरे साथ चलो हेवन में, मतलब स्वर्ग में। अब तुम चलो, तुम्हारा काम हो गया है, अब तुम चलो मेरे साथ रहना, मेरे गार्डन में खेलना। Christ blesses the child to live in heaven. अगले दिन क्या होता है? द नेक्स्ट डे व्हाट हैपेंस? जब बच्चे दिन में खेलने आए, लोगों ने देखा जायंट पेड़ के नीचे लेटा हुआ है और उसके पूरे बॉडी पर वाइट फ्लावर्स, उजले फूल से उसका पूरा बॉडी कवर्ड था. So he had the